Hey everybody, so we are going to be talking about equations of circles today. So with equations of circles, all it is now you're going to be able to graph circles on a coordinate plane. Now there is a special type of equation that you're going to use, and your calculator can't handle this. So standard form of a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. H is the x coordinate, and the y coordinate is k. HK is the center of the circle, so that's a center point. And then R right here, of course, is going to be the length of the radius. All right, so it looks hard, looks complicated, but I promise you it's easy. And in fact, each of these sections in our notes today is going to keep building and keep getting harder. Today's notes are a little bit long because it's 2 days worth of notes all in one. And it's some notes that you don't typically see in geometry, but you will need for pre-cal, which is what you take after Algebra 2. So the first thing is, if you have been given the center and the radius. So all you need to know is that h is the x-coordinate of your center. Meaning h is 5, k is 3, and your radius, your r, is 2. All you're going to do is plug it in. So this pink goes where the pink is, the teal goes where the teal is, and the orange goes where the orange is. Or if you want to call that teal blue, you can do that too. Whatever makes you happy. So now it's going to become x minus 5 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 2 squared. 2 squared is 4, so you cannot leave it like that because it is not in its simplest form, which means this right here would be your final answer. All right, so let's try another one. This one, similar, and you're going to have your h of -4, k of 0, and your radius of square root of 47. All you're going to do, plug it in. Now the square root of 47 squared, let me put those parentheses in there, those are going to cancel out because the square root and a square, those are inverses. Just like adding is the inverse of subtracting and multiplying is the inverse of dividing. So squaring something is the inverse of square root and vice versa. Notice when we subtract this, it's going to end up becoming a plus here, and y minus 0, well, that's just going to be y, which means your final equation is going to look like this. You're not always going to have a y minus something. We would not write y minus 0 or y plus 0 as that quantity inside the parentheses that's being raised to the second power. So that would be it. Pretty easy. Now, if you've been given the diameter, remember, that means you're going to have to divide it by 2 to find the radius. I want you to pause the video, write your equation, and then check yours with mine. And this is what you should get once you've plugged it in. Remember, always check what they've given you. Diameter, radius, what do you got? All right, now we're going to write these equations given a graph. So the first thing you need to do is find the center of the circle. That center point right here is going to be -2, 4. And you'll notice your radius here is 2 because you can go horizontally 2 and hit a point. Same thing, you can go vertically and you can hit a point. And it doesn't matter if you go up or down or left or right. Pick the easy ones. Work smarter, not harder. Don't be trying to find something and figure out what that point is right there. No. All right, so you've got your radius of 2, drop it on in. This right here counts as your work. You do not have to do these first 2 lines if you don't need them. This line helps you remember what that equation is. And the more you write it down, the easier it will be for your brain to remember. And your final answer will be this. All right, so I want you to try this next one. You'll be able to see the graph on your notes. Okay, so find the center and then find the radius. All right, you get a center of 3, -2, and your radius of 5, which means this right here is going to be your final equation for this. All right, so far, easy. all you're doing is plugging stuff in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be given the center and a point on the circle. So it's one of these random points that I was telling you about. It's not vertically or horizontally down. It's some random diagonal point from the radius. So what's going to end up happening is you're going to have to find the radius. There are two ways. The first way is to use the distance formula from the center and this point right here. Remember that the distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Do PEMDAS, find your distance. Remember, any number squared is just going to be a positive number. And you get that the square root of 29 is the length of that radius. It's a distance from the center to that random point on that circumference of the circle. You cannot simplify the square root, so that's fine. Leave it as so. Your radius is just the square root of 29. Plug your answer in. Again, you do not need to show these two lines if you don't need them. I would recommend you always write down the formula because it'll help you. And this right here would be your final answer. Remember, your h and your k values always flip signs. So even though this is a positive 2 and a positive 3, we write -2 and -3 because of this equation. Writing that equation helps you remember that. All right. The second way of doing this is plugging it in. So what that means is, you know how we've got this x and this y here? Those are placeholders, just like when you've got y equals 4x plus 3, which is slope-intercept form. That y and that x, those are placeholders for points on the line. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug this x in right here. We're going to plug this y in right here. And then we're going to solve for the radius. So, do you use your PEMDAS? You should get -8 on each of these parentheses. That won't always happen, but it did. It's kind of nice. All right, and you get 64 plus 64, which is really just 128. Now, I want to remind you, work smarter, not harder. It's telling us that r squared is 128. That's all we need right here to write our equation. But sometimes I'm going to ask you, what is the radius? At which point you need to take the square root of this and simplify that radical, which gets you 8 square root 2. But again, we've already got r squared, so we can write our equation down right here with that r squared already. You only need to know what that r is and simplify it that far if I'm going to ask you what the radius is, or if you needed to find the circumference or area, etc. All right, this last one, you're like, oh my gosh, how would I even do this? I've been only given 1 point, and that's my center. What they've given you is something very important. They said that this circle is tangent to the y-axis. So sketch it out. If we sketch it out, we've got -3, 2 right here, with our x of -3 and our y of 2. And if it's tangent, that means it's only hitting it right here. It's touching it and then leaving it. Something probably like that. It's also perpendicular, which means we can walk horizontally straight across. And we can count that we've got 3 units there. And those 3 units, that's how long our radius is. So you don't even have to do the math, you just have to visualize it. Because it's tangent, you can just count across. So plug it into your equation, and that's all you got. Check this out. Make sure you're watching those signs. You get the wrong sign, sorry, it's wrong, because it means something completely different. All right. Now we're going to get a little bit harder, okay? We've got given the endpoints of a diameter. So pretty much, we've got our circle, and they've given us 2 points that are going through the center. That line is going through the center, but they've given us these 2 points on the circumference, which means we're going to have to use 2 different equations. To find the length of my radius or my diameter, I'm going to have to use the distance formula. In order to find the center, or that location right there of the center, I'm going to need to use the midpoint formula. So everything from that first chapter is still being used. Oops, that should say center, C for center. So I did the distance formula first, and then I found the length of my diameter and then simplified it to find this length of my radius. And then I found the midpoint, which was my center. Doesn't matter. Whichever order you go in, it won't matter as long as you use both of these equations. All right, so this one, when I plug it in, okay, I get that the distance is square root of 80, which is simplifies to 4 square root of 5. This is the distance or the length of my diameter, which means I'm going to have to divide it by 2 to get the length of my radius. This simplifies to 2 square root of 5 over 1. That 1, just like air, it's always there, but you're not always going to see it, so we're not going to see it. And we just get 2 square root of 5 for my radius. All right, we've got my radius. Now I need to use the midpoint formula to find the center point so I can write the entire equation. Remember, your midpoint, it's the average of your x values and the average of your y values. So I'm going to add my x values together, divide them by 2. Then I'm going to add my y values and then divide them by 2. And you should get negative 12, 5. We're going to plug that into our equation because we've got our h and our k values. And this is what we get. This square root of 20 happens because I'm squaring this number right here, which means 2 squared times the square root of 5 squared. This becomes 5, and this becomes 4, and 4 times 5 gets us that 20. All right, so I want you to try this one. Pause the video, find the midpoint, find the distance, okay? So find the length of your radius and where your center point is. All right, now that you're back, you should have gotten that this was your center and this was your radius, which means, and let me extend that line out, you should get this as your equation. Remember, r squared gets us right here, and it cancels out that square root because it's the inverse. All right, next up, this is actually getting easier now. So given the circumference or area, I want to remind you, okay, that the formula for circumference is 2 pi r. And we're looking for the radius, which means you can set these equal to each other. So 25 pi is equal to 2 pi r. The pi's on each side are going to cancel out because we're only looking for that radius. Divide both by 2, and you get that r is equal to 25 halves, which is really just 12.5. And that's an exact version of that. So we're going to drop it on into our equation, and 12.5 squared gets us at 156.25. You'll notice I did not write x minus 0 squared or x plus 0 squared. That's too much. We don't need it. So simplify, simplify, simplify. If you write x minus 0 or x plus 0 squared, you're going to get it wrong. You're going to get it wrong on the test. All right, I want you to try this one. Find your h value, your k value, and your radius, and then write your equation, your simplified equation. All right, you should have gotten this as your equation right here. Your h value was 10, your k value was 7, and your radius for this was 7 as well. Because 14 divided by 2 is 7. And then 7 squared got you that 49. All right, now what if you've been given the area? Well, remember that this is going to be pi r squared. And this is a prime example of when we can work smarter and not harder. And that's because you'll remember that in our actual equation, we need r squared. So we know that this right here is r squared. I don't even need to find what my radius is. I can just drop things in. Now, if I asked you for what the radius is, you would just take the square root of that number, which is 20. okay? But notice, I could have gotten to this without having to do that. I want you to write the equation for this one, and then I also want you to tell me what the h value is, your k value is, and what your radius is. Because sometimes I'm going to ask you what the length of that radius is. All right, so you should have gotten x plus 6 squared plus y minus 2 squared is equal to 1. Because remember, there is a 1 here. Just like air, it's always there, but you don't always see it. And the square root of 1, well, that's just 1. Your h value for this was a -6, your k was a 2, and your r was a 1. Awesome. Now we're going to move on to once we've been given an incomplete equation. This is also known as general form. Some people use this phrase, some people don't, but you should be able to do it. This uses the Algebra 1 skill of completing the square, meaning you need to know your perfect square trinomials or how they're set up. If you don't remember, go check the Algebra 1 video. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to group all of the x's together, and we're going to group all of the y's together. And then this one that doesn't have anything, we're going to move it to the opposite side by doing the opposite action or the inverse. Notice I've color-coded it to help us out. Okay, so the number that goes here is going to be half of my b value squared. And what I do to one side of the equal sign, I'm going to have to do to the other so I can balance it out. And when I go ahead and group them, check it out. I can go ahead and simplify it using this number that I am squaring. So x minus, well, -12 over 2 is -6. So it's going to become x minus 6 squared right here. And this becomes, oops, I should say a 6. And then it's y plus 7 squared, because you've got a plus in that number that's being squared. 81 is what we got here by doing 36 plus 49 and subtracting that 4. If you were asked, the radius for this is 9. You're not going to have a problem like this on your test except for as your bonus. All right, I want you to try this one. Pause, take a minute, take a breather, go back and review completing the square if you need it, because you're doing it twice at the same time, which is why it's so important to color code and group it. This is what you should get as your final equation, with your h value being 4, your k value being 3, and your radius being 25. I might phrase it to you as give me the center, which means you would write it as a coordinate pair as 4, 3, and your radius being 5, sorry. All right, last section, y'all. This one's the easy one. So we started off easy, we got harder, 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 and now we're back to easy. When you're graphing equations, you want to pull your h and k value. Your h and k value is going to give you your center. In this case, that's going to be 3, 1. My radius for this is going to be the square root of it, which is going to be 3. Now I'm going to take that and go perpendicular from my center and build those radiuses. And then I'm going to draw my circle. Now this circle is perfect because of course I used the computer to help me out. Now, you're not going to have that. So if you're doing it by hand, I would do a quarter at a time. And that's how my circles are usually as close to perfect as possible when I'm graphing by hand. They won't be perfect, but they can be when you do it this way. I want you to tell me what the center is for this and the radius. You should get these h and k values and this radius, which means your center is going to be at 2, -1. And that's what I've got graphed here. Your radius, the 5 does go off on this side right here, so just estimate it's pretty close. And you should get something like this. All right, thanks for watching.